I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that today, and then afterwards you get a chance to get a signed copy of the book. The other thing about the book is, right now, it's not out until the 27th of February. So this is literally the only place in the whole wide world where you can purchase a copy right now. And I think they have about 25 in stock, but you can pre-order because there's some more on the way. So until the 27th of February, this is it for you. So let me talk a little bit about it. Let me tell you a little bit about myself first. I am what's called a cognitive hypnotherapist. Nobody knows what a cognitive hypnotherapist is, so I don't expect you to know what that is. I am neither a cognitive therapist, nor a cognitive behavioural therapist. I'm also not a hypnotist. So if you think I'm going to be able to make you cluck like a chicken, I can't. If that's disappointing for you, I can help you a lot with that. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the way the head works, because that's kind of the basis of the book. So most of us think that we are in control most of the time. We think that we have free will, willpower, self-control, and then sometimes we kind of lose it. And we grab the chocolate cake, or we don't go to the gym because it just seems too warm in bed, or whatever it is. We think we don't have willpower. But the reality is that 90% of the time, your subconscious is in charge. The role of your subconscious is to keep you safe and well. And it does that internally in a way we all know, right? Keeps your heart pumping, keeps your lungs going, does all the stuff inside of you very clearly, fights off viruses that attack you. All that stuff inside, it knows really well. But in that 90% is also the stuff that keeps you safe and well on the outside, where it's looking for threats to you from outside, and it's protecting you from them by triggering an equally physical response. That's how it works. So 90% of the day, this part of you is keeping you safe and well. The problem is, this part of you is quite frankly stupid. It's both stupid and emotional, because the thinking part of your brain, this bit at the front, is the bit that's not necessary for survival. That's the last 10%. So if your subconscious thinks there is something going to cause you a threat, the first thing it does is switch off your thinking brain and default you down to your subconscious. So when you think about that 90% of the time, where you're in what you might call a trance state, right? Some people call it daydreaming, some people call it off somewhere. If you imagine if you drive, when you drive from one place to another, and you get to the destination, and you can't remember any of the journey. And that scares the heck out of you, doesn't it? Because you think, I could have jumped red lights, I could even have run people over, and I wouldn't have known because my head was somewhere else, right? That's because your subconscious just keeps you going. It works perfectly well in partnership with that little 10% that's precious in your brain, just to keep you thinking straight. The problem is when you're faced with a threat, because then you don't have your 10%. Now that 10%, this bit here, needs energy to function. And people like it quite a lot when I tell them you have to have chocolate to be able to think. Because that's true. If your blood sugar's low, your prefrontal cortex won't work. So you need to have energy in your prefrontal cortex to think straight. So if you're tired, you can't think straight. You know that thing where you're just in a haze? You literally cannot think straight because you can't. Because thinking is not necessary to survival. So when you're tired, it's like you don't switch on the radio in a car when the battery's low. Because that'd be stupid, right? So when you're tired, your subconscious switches off your thinking brain because it's not necessary, and you have to default. And the way you can tell that is when you try and make a cup of tea when you've had no sleep. Because then you take a sip of your cup of tea and you realise you've made it with cold water. Because your subconscious is stupid. It doesn't know how to make a cup of tea. It needs the thinking part of your brain to be able to make it work. So, we know the subconscious is in charge 90% of the time, and it's stupid. So we're in a pretty bad place to start off with. And then, if your subconscious thinks something's going to threaten you, it will trigger a response. So, number one phobia in the UK, spiders. There are no venomous spiders in the UK, there are no biting spiders in the UK, but the number one phobia in the UK is spiders. And that means we all are either scared of spiders, or know somebody who's scared of spiders. And if you think of a situation, either one of those, where a spider comes into the room, and please don't run out right now, so I haven't got a spider, it's okay. If you think of a situation where a spider comes into the room, then that person, no matter how they are in normal day-to-day life, changes, right? They go into fight, flight, freeze response, and I have to say those really slowly because otherwise I swear. Right? So it goes into a response which is, spider. Now, I don't know anybody who goes into fight response with a spider. I've never met anybody yet who goes into a fight response with a spider. But they go into a fight or flee, or flee. Told you, it's impossible to say without swearing. Now, the interesting thing about the flight response is they might jump on a chair, and if you're not scared of spiders, you're going, you do know they can climb walls, right? But they're not thinking straight. They've lost their ability to think because their subconscious has taken them into a protective state. When the spider's gone, when the threat's gone, they get their brain back. And when you get your brain back, you go, oh, what's wrong with me? I'm stupid, this is crazy, why didn't I adjust? Which is exactly the same thing that happens when you're trying to resist chocolate, or you're trying to motivate yourself to do something, or give up cigarettes, or not drink. When you don't do it, when your subconscious wins, you beat yourself up. You beat yourself up with your conscious brain for something your conscious brain had no control over whatsoever. So you can see why we all get a bit of a problem with this, right? 90% of the day, some people say 95%. I have a problem with that because that means only 5% I get to think, but anyway, at least 90% of the day, this primitive, stupid, emotional part of your brain's in charge. And that's true for all of us. So what we can know is that we're all screwed up. That makes it easier, right? We're all screwed up, we've all got a stupid, primitive subconscious ruling our behaviours each day. What we can also know is when you've got something that's getting in the way, it's not your fault. It's the stupid, primitive part of your brain that thinks it's protecting you by doing something stupid. But it's not. So then you have to say, okay, well, how come, if we've all got subconscious in charge 90% of the day, how come we're all not scared of spiders, and we're all not having the same problems? What is it that makes the difference between somebody that is and somebody that isn't? How does the subconscious know what to protect us from? Because it's really easy inside, clear scientific rules for how to pump your heart and keep the breath going and all that sort of stuff. But what about the stuff outside of you? And I had a puppy. And when I used to go down the walk for a walk with a puppy, if a pheasant flew out of the hedge, the puppy got his hackles up, kind of got all tense, and unfortunately this puppy, which was a black Labrador, did a Scooby-Doo style run and try and jump into my arms. Not very practical, but he had a clearly defined response to, pheasant, run away. It wasn't so obvious to him what to do when he saw a car, because a car didn't have a clear rule of what you do when something's like that. So he would look to me for the best way to respond to a car. And he would learn from me so that when he was an adult dog and he was around cars, he could stay safe. So then I did that, Scooby-Doo jump into his arms. So what happens is, all through childhood, your subconscious is writing a rule book that it will learn from and it will use to keep you safe once you hit 14 to 16 years old. Once it thinks you're an adult and responsible for yourself, it follows the rule book. So all through childhood, it's writing a rule book that says, this is what you do when you see a car, you see a pheasant, don't do the Scooby-Doo thing, right? So, it's writing this rule book all through childhood. Now this is a bit of a catch, right? Because childhood means that you have limited capacity to understand the world around you. By definition, you do not understand the world in the same way as you do as adults. And in childhood, you've got this primitive, stupid part of your brain making decisions about how to keep you safe when you become an adult, when you don't even understand the world. You can understand why we're all a bit screwed up, right? Because 90% of the day, this part of our head is looking after us. Bit of a problem. So, there are 3 fundamental rules for survival that your brain is looking and measuring against all through childhood. These are all based on the caveman days of survival, not the modern days of survival. But they're slightly adapted. Not evolved, very important to know the difference, adapted. So, first rule of survival. They're all really simple, and they all result in death. Okay? First rule of survival. If you take time to think about something, you will die. So, if I'm attacked by a sabre-toothed tiger, and I go, right, is this a good spear? I wonder if I can outrun it. It'll have eaten you. It's detrimental to survival to think. So when faced with a threat, your subconscious triggers an instant physical and emotional response to keep you safe. It floods your body with adrenaline, it increases your heart rate, sweaty palms, get ready to run away, fight, or just freeze on the spot. Fight, flight, freeze response, right? I said that okay that time. Cool, getting better, try it more. So it triggers that response, that automatic, without you having to give it any thought, physical response. Now the interesting thing about this is, every single one of us will recognise that response. You might call it nerves, you might call it anxiety, you might even call it panic. We'll all recognise that response. And yet you might have noticed, there are no saber-toothed tigers. In fact, there are no predators to the human race out there at all. And yet, we can still describe that same response to all sorts of different things. problem is now, the adapting part, is that your brain is taking things that hurt you emotionally and equating them to physical harm. So something that hurts you emotionally equals death in the same way as something physically will. So let's say you're 3 years old, stood in front of the Christmas tree, about to sing Jingle Bells. You've been practicing for days, and your mother's gone mental in fairness, but you've been practicing for days because you're going to sing this. You've been asked to sing Jingle Bells for your family. So you stand there in front of the tree and your family sat around and you start singing Jingle Bells, and you had a really funny way of saying bells. You have a funny little lisp whenever you say bells. And everybody giggles because it's so cute when you say bells when you sing Jingle Bells. But you've just spent the last few days practicing singing this really well, and you think you're doing the best thing you possibly can. So everybody laughing at you is not the response you expected here. And your subconscious goes, right, I need to learn from this. This is important because this hurts. This is a horrible feeling. We don't like this feeling. I'm going to learn a lesson and put it in your rule book to keep you safe from this in the future. Because something hurting emotionally equals death, and it's not going to let you die. So, fast forward, you're an adult, you go into a meeting room. Somebody tells you, stand up and introduce yourself to a room full of people. And instantly, your heart drops to the floor, it's kind of pacing away, sweaty palms, heart rate going, everything like that. And you're like, what's wrong with me? You know, I was talking to them over coffee 5 minutes ago, there's nothing scary here, I should be able to do this. And you have this little argument going on in your brain, the little 10% that's desperately trying to assert itself. And if you're lucky, the 10% will win and you'll get a chance to actually introduce yourself, but then you'll go, I will never do that again. In fact, I will so never do that again, I will make sure I'm never in a job that has got any chance of me having to do that ever in my life again. And your subconscious goes, you see, I'll look after you, don't worry about it. And there goes, that rule was valid, you see. But if I said to you, go into that room, there's a sabre-toothed tiger, then that reaction would totally make sense, right? You'd be mad to go into a room with a sabre-toothed tiger. So it's a miscalculation though, because at 3 years old, you didn't understand enough of the world to know that they were giggling because you were kind of cute and it was a nice thing. Also, it was not true that being hurt emotionally equals death, because you're standing there in that meeting room trying to talk to people, right? So you're not dead. So it was wrong. So emotional hurt doesn't equal death. So you end up with miscalculated rules in your rule book that then trigger instant behaviour before you get a chance to think your way out of it, because thinking gets in the way. So that's the first rule. Number one reason why we're all screwed up. Number two reason why we're all screwed up. If your mother didn't love you when you were a cave baby, you'd die. I told you they all end up in death, right? So when a baby's born in the animal world, if it doesn't bond with its parents, it dies. Simple fact. And it was the same in the caveman days. If you didn't bond with your mother, you would die. And so we are genetically programmed all through childhood to make everything about love. Am I loved more or am I loved less as a result of what I've just done? If I believe I'm loved less as a result of what I've just done, I need to change my behaviour, because otherwise I'm going to die. And that's a bad thing. We're not going to die. So you're learning stuff all through childhood. So the first thing is, let's say you're 8 years old, you sat at your kitchen table doing your homework. Dad comes in from work and you, Dad, I'm stuck on this question, can you help me? And your dad goes, oh, for God's sake, I've only just got in through the door. Can't you do anything on your own for once? And off he stops. And you go, right, I asked for help and I got shouted at by my dad. I have to make everything about love, so he loves me less because he shouted at me. I have to learn a lesson to keep safe in the future. Don't ask for help, because it means you won't be loved. And then as an adult, whenever you've got a problem, you kind of struggle on by on your own. You don't know why, it just doesn't feel comfortable to reach out and ask anybody for help. But the reality is, if you'd left him half an hour through the door, he'd have probably been fine. The fact that he shouted at you is just a sign that he'd had a grumpy day at work, not that he didn't love you. And so the rule never needed to be there in the first place. And if you put 100 kids in that situation, probably only one of them would end up with a rule. The other 99 would be just another of the millions of moments that you go through in childhood that have no significance. It happens on the flip side. You fall over, you scuff your knee, and your mother gives you a sweet to stop you crying. You go, all right, when I hurt myself, my mum gives me a sweet, which means she loves me. What do I do when I'm an adult and I need to feel loved? Grab a bag of sweets, because that makes me feel better. So all these things are happening all through childhood, and it's not the big things, by the way. So this isn't about having a rubbish childhood or a great childhood. None of that matters. Because if something happens in your childhood that's big and traumatic, there's nothing to learn from that. It doesn't become a rule. It just becomes an exception to the rules. It's only the little subtle things of all those millions of moments in your childhood that end up in the rule book. And the last and final rule, like the other two weren't enough, is if you're not part of a pack, you're going to die. I told you they all ended up in death, right? Because in the caveman days, there was no chance of you surviving on your own. You had to be part of a pack. And so again, we are genetically programmed to connect to the strongest person in the pack, and also kind of oust the weakest person in the pack, because that way the pack stays strongest. Fast forward to a school playground, and somebody calls you a specky four eyes. Big deal, stupid insult. But to your subconscious, you've just been identified as the weakest person in the pack, and the weakest person in the pack's going to die. And we can't have that, so you have to learn something about how they don't spot that you're the weakest. So you end up with a rule that says, stay away from the pack, because if they spot that you're the weakest, then you're going to die. So you feel like you never fit in. You feel like you're always different, everybody's better than you, you feel uncomfortable around other people, even though you kind of like to be around. Every time you try and put yourself in those situations, your subconscious goes, if they spot you're the weakest, you're going to die, and I'm not going to let you die. And so all through your childhood, up until the age of between 14 and 16, this rule book's been written. And then, once you become an adult, 90% of your day is being driven by this rule book. Which is why we're all screwed up. Because they're all miscalculations. Because by the very fact that you're an adult, you didn't die when any of these things happened. So it's always wrong. So that's what the book's about. The book's about the 3 different rules. And there are some different case studies of working with different clients about situations where you can see how the rule really gets in the way in your life. And I guess the key message for me is, they're just rules in a rule book, right? Imagine if you delete the rule in the rule book. Imagine if you delete the rule from the little 3-year-old girl, where she, with your adult insight, was able to see that it was just that you were cute. And so you didn't have a rule. And if you don't have a rule, you don't have a trigger. And so when you're standing up in front of people, your subconscious doesn't take you into a protective state, because there's no reason to. And so you can kind of keep your free thinking, and that's what this is all about. This is about the ability to keep using the 10%, because it is fairly precious. So what you want to do when you're hijacked is work out what you think that rule is, because if you can change the rule, you can free up your thinking brain again. And that's it. So as I mentioned,